Welcome to Coffee with Cornelius. Today I'm really excited because we're talking about the politicization of COVID-19 science and how scientists are going to have to do work in order to restore the public's faith in them. Joining me is Dr. Joseph Ladapo, a physician and health policy researcher who is associate professor in residence at the University of California, Los Angeles' David Geffen School of Medicine, UCLA. His research deals with coronary artery disease and behavioral economic interventions to improve cardiovascular health. He graduated from Wake Forest University and received his MD and PhD degrees from Harvard. Dr. Ladapo, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited about this.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say two things. First,
Sure.
I'm speaking myself and not on behalf of UCLA. That's something I have to say. And secondly, I apologize in advance. I have 3 little boys. They're at the other side of the house, and they may show up, and I'm sorry.
That is fine. That's okay.
Don't blame me. Blame the mayor. Blame the governor.
If they Zoom bomb, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I have a dog here, and I have also an 11-month-old baby. So 11-month-old baby, excuse me. So who knows? We could both get Zoom bombed. But I'm really having you on today because you wrote a fantastic piece, if I may just say, in the Wall Street Journal. It was called The Coronavirus Credibility Gap, and I'm going to put a link to that piece in the description box below. You argue that COVID-19 has become politicized. The science has become politicized. What do you mean by that?
Thank you. I really enjoyed writing it, and I'm glad that it reached people and it sort of really touched some people. So we're here in the United States, and it's normal for everything to be political. So there's not really there was no other fate for COVID or for any other issues that are of significance in this country than for that issue to have some degree of politicization.
Sure.
What's remarkable about COVID is that the way it was approached as a public health problem initially seemed to almost, go beyond politics. It's really profound, right? What a huge intervention to ask people, indeed force people to stay in their homes, abandon their businesses, abandon their schools, abandon their social networks. It's a really profound request. And that goes beyond politics. And that's where we started. And then it became degraded. And it was degraded almost with an, accelerated momentum. Mm-hmm. Part of that we saw in how the protesters and their gatherings were treated by politicians, by political leaders, and just in very sharp contrast to other public gatherings, such as the protests against the shutdowns. Those people were disparaged. Some of them were charged, were arrested, and they were really targeted.
Yeah.
But it's a really profound thing. This country, one of the things that's special about this country, but it's not something that's just special to this country, it could be in any country, is that, the belief in liberty, which is not to say that the government and organizations aren't important, but really that is almost at the core of the creation of this country. And what sort of touched the hearts and minds of enough people to come together, and to make to become independent, and then really that love of the individual and that same spirit is what has propelled the most important social revolutions in this country's history. It's so important. From civil rights, rights for other groups that have been marginalized. At the core is that there is an individual, and that individual, should not be, should be free.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. That's way bigger than COVID. We only have the luxury to fight COVID because of what we've been able to create from core principles in our society. So the way these protesters were dismissed is quite a profound thing. And even
Hmm.
though a lot of people shrugged it off, it's really a profound thing. And and then in sort of leading up to it, it wasn't so much politics but power. And
Hmm.
I think not everyone saw it that way, but there really was this issue of power too. So whether it was the Michigan governor, or governors were basically elevated to a place where they had, with these emergency declarations, where they had just unbelievable power
Yeah.
in the sense that what they could they could decree, issue decrees. What they wanted was what sort of was what was, and that's like profound power, right? Which again, to go back to people who are very wise in the past and in the present, like Thomas Jefferson, for example. Power is a powerful thing, but it's also a very delicate thing.
Hmm.
And in terms of its potential to create harm. And moreover, it tends to be the case that when people acquire it, they often do not want to let it go. And
Yeah.
that's meaningful too. And that's really what was at play when, it wasn't science, right? When people, surfers in the ocean, or being,
Oh.
or
Yeah.
chasing. I mean, give me a freaking
Or
break.
outdoor church services, which are in the
Yeah.
car
Oh,
and drive through.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Just like, not only was it really stupid, but that was really about power. And then we entered an area where politics was, what side of the fence people were sat on, was what was ruling the day.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And, in your article, there are two things that you point to. You already mentioned the protests. I think you also mentioned the implementation of face masks. Initially, face masks don't do anything. And then I guess, narrative was, oh, we're actually saving face masks for workers. And then everybody wear face masks. But there's also
Right.
been, I've noticed, a politicization when it comes to drugs, pharmaceuticals, vaccines, in particular, hydroxychloroquine, HCQ has been in the media a lot. For example, we have two retracted studies from the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, which claim to show that HCQ harms COVID-19 patients. And these studies were heavily promoted by the media. But as we know now, they were reliant on false data, and this data
Yeah.
is
Or at
not.
least they did
Yeah,
it wasn't credible,
yeah,
because you
exactly.
couldn't
It was
use it. Right.
incredible. Was incredible data. It was, and yet nobody talks about the retractions now in the media, and work that seems to confirm that HCQ has some positive benefits, such as the work of Didier Raoult in France, was hardly covered. Is there an attempt, do you think, to politicize research into, say, HCQ as well?
Yeah, it's such a weird time right now. I mean, the answer is yes, and it's
Hmm.
and it's just manifestly the answer. So I joked around with a friend recently, when we were talking about school reopenings, and I said probably the quickest way to get them open again is to just have Trump saying they should stay closed.
That's
And
probably
that's
true.
where we are. Yeah, it's probably the quickest
Yeah.
route. That was probably the quickest way to do it.
Yeah.
And um, and and I get, people like some politicians, people don't like some politicians. Trump has obviously done some important things. He's also done some good things,
Hmm.
and and right now they are literally the expression that people are sort of blinded by their hate, or their how much they loathe something, is is very certainly the case for many journalists, and that target of their animosity
Hmm.
is their animus is the president. And the problem with getting in a place like that, which is different from just not, which is different from disapproving, in disapproving in the strongest terms with what someone says or believes or does. The problem with getting in a place like that is that, it is really hard to separate your actions from the influence of those powerful emotions. And
True.
it would be better to acknowledge them than to sort of try and ignore them and kind of going on about your business as if they are as if it's not a real thing. And there's like no question that part of the reason just hydrochloroquine has gotten such a bad rap is because of the president, which is like ridiculous. It's so silly, stupid, and harmful. Consider that this is a medication that has been used for decades
Yeah.
with this relatively safe safety profile, with a relatively good safety profile in patients with lupus and patients with other connective tissue disease and people who are taking prophylaxis for trips to locations with malaria. And it's just never been it's just another medication. It's never been so controversial, but now it's really been ratcheted up to the really high degree, and it has clouded what people are interested in covering about it. The truth about its use as like a potential prophylactic is completely still in the air. What's bad is that because of how it's been covered, it may make it harder to figure out what that truth is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, no doubt, and it's so important because I've actually, when I was sort of more naive, I believed that, I saw the studies, okay, it probably doesn't work. And someone who, but then you talk to doctors who used it, and some of them, and it's common, right, for doctors to think that something works, even
Sure.
though like clinical trials don't support it. But the passion with which they support its use is beyond analogous situations with medications that are like that people use, even though there may not be strong clinical evidence for it. So it's really made me have serious doubts about the science that we have done more strongly about the need for studies, high quality studies. And there have been a lot of observational studies, but high quality randomized trials that really test this idea of using it as a prophylactic medication and in combination with zinc, plus or minus azithromycin. That's something I hear often. So it needs to be done. It's just it's important that we find the answer.
Yeah. And so I'd like to ask you now, I'd like to turn a little bit to the World Health Organization, which is another big player in the apparent politicization of science and the political influence on science. We have evidence, for example, that the WHO, the WHO, follows China's dictates on issues related to Taiwan, for example. We see that with the Bruce Aylward interview, for instance, and the WHO's refusal to share data with Taiwan. How should the WHO be reformed in light of these revelations?
Great. Yeah, that's an important question. I'm not smart enough or knowledgeable enough to be able to really provide a good answer. From the limited information I know, of course, the WHO is going to be an organization that has to answer to politics. I will say that the documents they produced related to pandemics that I've reviewed are really high quality. So the potential for good science is there, and a track record of that. In terms of the political aspects, they're probably essentially in a more or less impossible position, trying to bring both countries and funding from countries that are not all aligned into the same vein is obviously going to be challenging. there almost certainly is probably a better way to do it, and I hope that they are thinking about that. But I'm not sure what that better way is.
Fair enough. Would you say that the United States' decision then to pull funding and pull its membership from the WHO is not a wise decision?
I will say that I myself am not wise enough to be able to reach a conclusion on that point. I mean, most scientists, or at least most prominent scientists in this country, have had a negative view of kind of the move to separate from the WHO. And and I can understand why they would feel that way. I can also understand why the White House may feel that separation, or at least the threat of separation, is in their best interest. So, like most political issues, it's something that I hope that there's some backroom dealing right now, negotiating about how to improve the governance.
Yeah. I mean, we've had problems with the politicization of science, it seems, both in the regional sense. We talked about the governors, we can talk about the WHO, and perhaps that's a separate issue. But the fact is that I agree with you, there has been a politicization of this kind of science. What concrete steps should scientists do now to restore the public's confidence, and especially certain sections of the public's confidence, that the scientists have credibility?
Hmm. I mean, I think that scientists generally still are viewed as being very credible. I think it's more leadership that is
Mhm.
lost somewhere
By
where.
leadership, do you mean political leadership and public
Exactly,
health officials sort of thing? Okay.
yeah. But simultaneously, we're in a place um, where the quieting of contrary opinions is, creeping. The sort of the cancel culture
Hmm.
habits are sort of creeping into science somewhat. So, and some of this stuff has made news. I can't think of much right this moment that has made national news for very long, but it's, if some university does something atrocious enough that is viewed as despicable in terms of its silencing of dissent, of essentially, non-malignant dissent, so not dissent based on hate. But if some university does something atrocious enough to silence or punish dissent, it may grow into a situation where it does become a national story that sticks around for a while, and really then exposes and magnifies the sort of the micro stories, like the many examples, smaller examples of dissent being quieted, being punished, that's happening in universities. And that would be very unfortunate for science. And it's not unreasonable to think that it's not unreasonable to think that that is not a possibility. That is a possibility.
Fair enough. Now, one more question before we go. Do you think we should reopen the economy? And if so, how should we go about doing it in a way that is sustainable and health conscious as well?
Yeah, yeah. Well, really briefly, one of my colleagues is Dr. Rajiv Bhatia,
Hmm.
and if I can, if you in the Wall Street Journal article, I think there are two hyperlinks, and his is the second one.
Okay.
So he has laid out what I think is a really thoughtful way of thinking about reopening, and it's about protecting, really, really protecting the most vulnerable people,
Hmm.
and otherwise, and really focusing energy there, and mostly having lighter restrictions everywhere else. Like, one way to think about it is if it happens again, if we have another pandemic a year and a half from now, are we going to do this again? Like, you can
I
only do
hope
this
not. I really hope not. Yeah.
you can only do this so many times.
Yeah.
And that's the point, right? And the reason you can only do it so many times, it's a bad way to run stuff.
Yeah.
And so we should think of good ways to manage these things, you know. And if you can't do it again, then you probably need to think about whether you're doing the right thing right now. And if you again, Rajiv has Dr. Rajiv Bhatia has a lot of great suggestions, you know, still limiting crowd size, things like that, but really focusing energy and attention on, and resources on the most vulnerable. And that would be a sustainable way to kind of make it through this without destroying lives in the process, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, that actually seems very sensible, and I would agree with that. Thank you so much, Dr. Ladapo. I'm really honored to have had you on and to have talked to
Oh,
you.
thank you. Thank
Cheers.
you, Cornelius. Okay, bye.
Bye.